One of the things here that we'll talk about a lot on the CX channel, so this podcast and also the blog and the magazine and everything, one of the key concepts that we talk about is this concept of synergistic CX. The real concept of synergistic CX is measuring all of the different components of the customer journey using various methodologies. There's different ways to capture the CX of a company, and there's quite a few different ways to do it, and there's online reviews and ratings. There's also voice of the customer surveys, and here you can actually see all of that. So a synergistic CX program doesn't just do any one of these methodologies, because there's things that you can't do. Like so there's pros and cons with each one. And so, for example, if you think about the customer journey that we saw, we had some good averages in some areas, but then we saw some wide inconsistencies, that large gray area we were talking about. You've got here on the right these primary components of a synergistic CX program. You've got the subjective measurements, which are the online customer reviews and ratings and the voice of the customer surveys. So these are how you can get what your customers are telling you, and you can get the feedback, and that gives you an idea and a ballpark of what your customers think of your brand and the experience that they have. But once you have that, and you know that you've got quality issues or inconsistencies or areas to target, that's where these objective measurements, the second layer there, comes into play. And Jill, you actually pointed that out earlier with this particular industry study with the pubs. You'd recommend in the areas where we had a large discrepancy in the ordering process and engagement with the staff and such, that's where you would actually implement an objective measurement like mystery shopping, or possibly some internal quality audits to actually drill in and test the staff on an ongoing basis and make sure they're actually delivering the experience that you want to have them deliver. And so you really need both of these components here, the subjective and the objective measurements. Now, we also have down here at the bottom supplemental measurements, which are things like retail operations or employee feedback, which are ways that you can get insight into the customer experience as well. So those are helpful, but primarily the subjective components of the online customer reviews and ratings and the voice of customer surveys, and also the objective measurements of mystery shop evaluations, sensors if you have them, like what kind of foot traffic's coming in, how busy are we, that type of thing, and also internal quality and process evaluations. That's all the different components that really help you measure the CX. With each industry, there's different portions that are going to be more important at different times, depending on what you're trying to measure and what you're trying to accomplish in analyzing and improving your CX. Yeah, and on the right there, you can actually see all the different types of ways to approach these. Like there's many different types of mystery shop evaluations you can see. Christiane, Jill, what do you guys think with respect to the pubs and so forth? What do you see as like a synergistic CX program, and what methodologies do you think would be really helpful in the pub space?
Well, Jill already mentioned mystery shopping, and I will let it to her to talk a little bit about that more. But I want to point out a little bit more about the voice of employee surveys. This is something that is growing very fast. The Institute for Customer Experience has conducted research recently, and we have seen that it has grown more than 50% the number of companies that have now voice of employee surveys. And I actually met with a CEO last week, and he said something that really stuck in my mind, that says that we never ask a customer something that we cannot ask an employee first. In the pub, this is true. I mean, the employees that are sometimes work there for a long time, and even people that work there for a shorter period of time, they have a lot of experience that they can share in terms of operations, what can go right and wrong every day. And it's a real opportunity to hear what these people have to say, especially when we are talking about survey fatigue. Emil pointed out an excellent example of a survey that's very short and concise and to the point. And if we need more information, what better opportunity there is than speaking with your own employees on your locations. So that, for me, is a real opportunity in terms of research, is talking to your employees. And Jill, a little bit more to add about mystery shopping?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I would say certainly is the change I've seen in terms of how clients are approaching this type of evaluation from a customer experience perspective, maybe sort of last 7 years, that the main change has been that different methodologies are being used to support one another. So when I first started in mystery shopping, it was very siloed. So we were developing the questionnaires on the basis of common sense. And some of us had common sense and some of us didn't. And now I see very much it's a case of, using information provided through other data streams to support the work I'm doing. So the crossover is a lot more obvious nowadays than it was certainly 5, 6, 7 years ago.
That's true. And it's important for clients to understand that different types of methodologies, they serve different types of purpose in terms of research. And these methodologies, they do not compete with each other, but they bring different outputs and they add value in different forms. So it's important for the agencies to be able to explain what are the values of each one of these and what are the methodologies that are more objective, some are more subjective, but they all bring different values to the table.
Yeah, definitely. What I'm seeing almost without exception now is my most powerful data that I'm presenting to my clients shows a really strong correlation between staff or employees who are highly engaged, a great level of customer service, and sales above target. And you don't really get much more powerful evidence than that in terms of the link between happy employees, make great customer service, make more money for the company. So yeah, it's getting more and more interesting, I really think, as time develops.
Yeah, I mean, as Erik mentioned, if you are talking about going to a place that you want to have a good time, you don't want to be served by someone that is in a bad mood, or you really want to have a good time. And particularly in this industry, it's important to have this good experience.
Yeah, pubs. I mean, it is exactly what you said. It's about the experience. I'm not just there just to have the thing that I could buy or make at home, probably, right? It's really to feel taken care of. It's to have an engaging conversation with the staff, have them be friendly. I don't want to feel like I'm being, I'm not a problem for you. I'm not an annoyance. I want to be someone that you're happy to see and happy to get taken care of. And personally, just one little thing for me that bugs me to no end is, and this is true not just in pubs, but restaurants too, but anyway, when the check comes, a lot of places they just cut off, like you're done, right? They don't come back and check on your water. They don't want to see if you have it. You could be there for half an hour and they're just going to ignore you. And that right there is just one of the small things I think that a lot of businesses could improve just a little bit. But especially in a place like a pub, like that little thing, if the checks come and everything and they come back and check on you, at least for me, that makes a huge difference in my impression of the business and the establishment and my decision to come back and also advocate for it.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's I was highly influenced by the sitcom Cheers, that you are supposed to be known by your name. And I'm really annoyed when I go to a place several times in a row and I have to almost remind them that I go there every time, and like how I like my coffee or how I like my food or something like that. Personalization is key in this kind of business.
I have a question. Jill, you mentioned earlier about combining multiple data streams, but you didn't elaborate on this. So can you please, in the context of pubs and your past experience, can you elaborate a little bit more on it? And what do you mean by proving our return on investment using data by combining with other data streams? Maybe share some examples from your past experience and current experience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, taking it maybe a little bit wider from a return on investment perspective, as I said earlier, most of my clients want to prove either that they've reduced their losses or they've increased their profits or their revenues. A few examples off the top of my head in terms of reducing losses. In a retail environment, I worked with a client, and this sounds so obvious, but it took mystery shopping to really prove the point. We found that in the spring and summer in the UK, when, believe it or not, we do actually get some sunshine, a lot of the individual locations were forgetting to water their plants, which sounds absolutely ridiculous, but clearly customers only purchase plants that look healthy and alive, because otherwise they don't, envisage their beautiful country garden or whatever it might be. We managed to reduce shrinkage or losses through really informing individual units that they needed to put a process in place and be tighter in terms of watering their plants. Another example, which is really prevalent in the UK at the moment, is theft in retail shopping centres, for example. And we found that by simply pointing out that fitting rooms weren't manned, we were increasing the likelihood of theft. So by increasing manning levels, we managed to reduce shrinkage in stores and provide a direct correlation in terms of what we were finding and reductions in shrinkage. In terms of, the pub sector, we carried out a study with one of the largest pub chains in the UK. And they'd identified issues with staff as well as quality of food. And they'd used customer satisfaction studies to work out the pure value of providing a better level of customer service. It was mainly product and people, I would say, from the marketing mix. I think the example, and I'll publish this in the magazine that we're going to send out to support this podcast. But when guests were welcomed promptly and warmly, overall satisfaction was 35% higher. Guests always thought speed of service and food quality were the non-negotiable make or breaks. And this final lasting impression made a difference, because when that was done well, the customer satisfaction feedback was that satisfaction was 44% higher on average. And once they understood that information that was gleaned through customer satisfaction work, and that was, high volume, so over 10,000 responses were used to bring this information together internally by my client. They needed mystery shopping as the vehicle they wanted to use to bring about positive change. So they moved from, we know what makes the difference, we know what's important to customers. They moved into, let's make this happen by developing a mystery shopping program using these key metrics, very much like the survey that you outlined there. Almost identical in terms of the areas we covered on the mystery shopping program to what you discussed from your Voice of Customer survey earlier.
Mm-hmm.
We had
I think that
success. All the key metrics were improved in the sample of visits that we carried out, which was 30% of a very large estate, which amounted to around about 300 visits a month over a 6-month period. Most interestingly of all was the revenue increases. So we increased the upsell figure by 8%, but that actually correlated in terms of a 7 pence. So I guess that's 7 cents for most of you guys listening, increase per customer. And there's 1 million customers across the estate every week. So the program paid for itself in 1 week in terms of proving return on investment. So that's one of the most powerful examples that I can give you right there.
Impressive. Jill, if you don't mind, I have actually 2 follow-up questions. One is linked to the employee engagement, and you just mentioned earlier that engaged teams show better performance and make more sales. Off top of your head, do you have a number that can just somehow differentiate between engaged versus less engaged or non-engaged stuff in terms of performance and sales? Your experience in that area. For example, top stores in terms of employee engagement perform X% better on budget versus struggling ones. Is there a number which is consistent in your experience as far as employee engagement is concerned?
think it's a difficult question for me to answer, Emil, because I tend to get the information from my clients rather than be allowed to interrogate their data myself. So I would provide the mystery shopping scores, and they would then overlay that with their financial information and their employee satisfaction results. So I think so I don't have access to the questions they would ask, for example, in terms of their employee satisfaction, and I don't see the percentage difference per se. In terms of sales, I just get percentage over target, and I don't know what the targets are that are being set. So it does differ widely from client to client. But what is consistent is we see when customer experience is poor and sales are poor, almost invariably mystery shopping performance supports that and is also poor. So you'll see the three metrics are struggling under the line for the poorer performers, whereas the top performers are invariably above the line on all three metrics.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And a follow-up on this, we know that mystery shop evaluations are very not only useful but critical measurement tool and methodology to have as far as objective measurements are concerned. But based on your experience and considering sensor-based measurements and internal quality and process evaluations, what is, in your experience with the clients that you have worked in the past and currently, what is the mix between the three groups of measurement methodologies: mystery shop evaluations, sensor-based, and internal quality and process evaluations?
Well, I don't have much knowledge in terms of the sensor-based activities that are carried out. It's quite rare that I use that information combined with anything that I supply. In terms of the other evaluations, for example, like employee experience, I know that it's typical for clients to carry those out annually.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of mystery shopping, more often than not now, I'm carrying out monthly evaluations.
Great.
And I think customer satisfaction is typically run in campaigns quarterly for the majority of my clients. So almost ongoing, but sort of within campaigns.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I have seen a trend that luckily we used to have this problem with the mystery shopping surveys being very long because a lot of questions that could be assessed via retail audits were being inserted into mystery shopping surveys. And now they are being separated again and being done by auditors and not by mystery shoppers. And that makes a lot of sense. And the mystery shoppers are more focused now in the experience, and questionnaires are becoming shorter again, which is really good because mystery shoppers, they have memory capacity to memorize things that are limited, and we cannot have surveys that are so long as they used to be. And in terms of sensor-based, that was your questions. I know, for example, in the Middle East, it's very common. And in terms of everything that can be measured digitally, they are very advanced in that area. And there is a lot of correlation studies among all these methodologies. So, Jill, I see that we have moved to automatically and naturally to our expert interview. And before we move to my questions that I have here prepared for you, I have special first question that we need to settle here. I know that you're a soccer fan, as most people in the UK. You are based in Manchester. So the first question we need to settle is, we of course agree that Cristiano Ronaldo is the greatest player of all times everywhere, right? Right?
He's certainly better than anyone that plays for my team, Everton. Yes. So I'll agree with you on that.
Okay. So we can proceed.
We can.
It's an honor to be your friend for almost 20 years, and we have been colleagues at the MSPA Europe Africa for 12 years. I checked it today. Jill was a president of MSPA Europe Africa, and president of the global board as well, and has been in this industry for a long time. My first question for you about the study that we have just seen about the ratings. A few years ago, there was this idea that only unhappy people or young generations were willing to share their opinions online. What is your opinion about this? What do you think about this type of feedback being collected online? Is it still just for unhappy customers and young generations, or is this something that is changing?
That's a great question. I mean, my view is that in general, either very happy or very unhappy customers are more likely to respond to a survey. And that's particularly the case if no incentives being offered by the company asking for the feedback. But I would say that, in my opinion, in the pub sector, because I think pubs were one of the early adopters of customer surveys as a mechanism, so I believe that they benefit from customer feedback more than most other sectors do. And the fact that younger generations are also more likely to provide feedback, as you say, works well for the pub sector as it suits their demographic. But interestingly, sort of over Christmas, I was looking at some of the research houses publishing their CX trends to look out for this year. And one of the key themes that a few of them have come up with and highlight is that the number of customers providing feedback to companies having had a bad experience is falling. So fewer are giving feedback directly, fewer are leaving reviews, and fewer will share their experiences on social media. And actually, the figures are quite startling, because since 2021, the number of customers providing feedback's fallen by 7 percentage points. And that means that 2/3 of customers now won't tell brands when they've had a bad experience. So it's clear more needs to be done by brands to understand the customer journey and how to make improvements.
Interesting.
That is shocking, because based on the study that you just presented, from all reviews with scores 1 or 2 out of 5, less than 10% responded on a timely manner. So maybe customers are just feeling that it doesn't make any sense to give a feedback at all.
Yeah, I think that's the most shocking finding of all of what you've outlined there. I mean, my belief, and I think logic would dictate, that many companies aren't resourced sufficiently well to fulfill this key requirement in terms of responding to feedback. And that's clearly a very big mistake. And that's a mistake that's going to impact footfall and revenue.
It's interesting, because I did a research about 2 years ago, just after the pandemic, and it was specifically with customers that normally give this type of reviews in sites such as Facebook or Google or Yelp, and they do have the expectation to receive a response. And interesting to see that in this case, most of the brands did not respond at all, and it's shocking. So I understand you, and you mentioned earlier that you also conducted a customer satisfaction study in the UK that brought interesting results regarding the pub industry, right?
Yeah, we were commissioned by one of the largest pub chains to carry out a study which was 30% of their estate, which they made sure was a representative sample. And the insight department had already used customer feedback at high volumes to establish the importance of the customer experience in terms of what drives customer satisfaction. And they knew that people and product, as you guys have outlined with your study, were key drivers. And they wanted to use mystery shopping as the vehicle to drive positive change across their estate. And actually, we were really successful. We helped the client make significant improvements, and that resulted in revenue increases far beyond their expectations. I think, to bring sort of figures to that, the mystery shopping program paid for itself within 1 month in terms of the increased sales that were achieved. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's all about revenue, isn't it?
Yeah, it is really. And it's interesting to understand that while the welcome was very important, the customer and farewell, the first impressions, were even more important for customers. I mean, in this study, it was like 35 versus 44%. What do you think about that?
Sure. I mean, I think that's logical. As human beings, I believe we tend to remember details towards the end of the experience more clearly than those at the start. But I would say the exception to that is if something especially good or especially bad has happened. So it's those, polarized experiences, I think, which we talked about earlier, are likely to result in a direct contact with a brand. But I'd say probably lasting impressions probably contribute the most in terms of customer satisfaction. So it's really important to get that aspect right.
Especially when it's the bill, right? When you ask for your check and you have to wait for a long time, it really annoys customers when they have to wait for a long time to pay. And going back here to the study that we presented, food and beverage, of course, are key factors. You're going to have fun and to eat something. But what's interesting to notice is the experience is more and more important in everything. And of course, in the pub industry, is not a different. In the market mix, the ambience has almost the same importance as the food quality. The ambience is 20%, about 21%, and the food quality is 19%, so it's almost the same. Is this once again the experience economy for you?
Well, I'm not sure if this answers your specific question, but what I've found is over the last 10 years of my work with companies across all sectors is that fast, friendly, and knowledgeable or helpful service alongside a good environment, a positive ambience, have consistently been the factors that are most likely to influence customers most in terms of their likelihood to return and recommend. And this does differ by industry or by sector. So, for example, in a McDonald's, the fast component would be more important than the knowledge, and probably the reverse would be true if you were buying a high ticket item like a TV. But those elements are the key part of the mix. And what I've actually found is when I'm developing mystery shopping surveys with my clients, they tend to want to add lots of different elements. So there might be 50, 60, 70 questions on the questionnaire. So I always encourage them to stick to the sort of metrics that we're talking about to monitor the behaviors that we've been talking about on this podcast, because they're the things that are going to make a difference in terms of bottom line and footfall. So, I mean, I think certainly in the pub sector, it's got to be experiential. Transactional service isn't going to get customers coming through the door and repeat business. So I think it's going to be really interesting in terms of how things pan out as we move forward in this particular sector. I do know that from my data, the data that I've collected, hospitality was slower to recover from the pandemic than retail was. Mm-hmm. And I think that's almost certainly down to the fact it was more difficult to recruit in that industry, because after COVID, when people were returning to work, they had the choice. People, had the choice where they were going to return to. And I know that my clients in hospitality found it more difficult to recruit a higher caliber of staff. So again, something to watch out for. I think things are now starting to improve as the right staff are in the right positions.
Yeah, and that actually is related to my next questions. I know at the same time, in terms of food quality, ambience, how important quality of service is. And I know that one of your passions is how to work on projects involving engagement and education of frontline workers. And I personally believe that customer experience walks side by side with employee experience. But what is your opinion? How leaders can walk that talk about employee experience and customer experience? What is failing here that's so difficult to recruit employees to work in retail?
Well, I mean, probably the best example I can share in terms of the importance of the front line is that the case study that I've shared just now, the program was tried with one of my competitors in terms of carrying out mystery shopping. And in that first attempt, the frontline weren't involved at all in the program. So the first they heard of it was when their results arrived in black and white, and they were told whether they were good or bad at customer experience. So the way I approached it was that I involved the frontline teams or a cross section of the frontline teams in the development of the survey. And that gave them self-esteem. It improved their energy and their enthusiasm for the program. And also I sort of briefed them on the importance of delivering customer experience to certain levels, to what the difference that made, showed some research stats. And that again engaged them in the understanding of why it was so important for them to deliver. And, as I've outlined, we had tremendous success because by involving the employees, we were able to raise the level of customer service, because ultimately those guys and girls are responsible for customer service and experience delivery, and doing whatever they can to create that ambience and that exceptional customer service in their own pub environment. So that's probably the best example I can give you.
Yeah, I actually had a meeting with Luis Duarte, who was also a president of MSPA until recently, and he has a really interesting project about humanization of results, and it goes directly with what you're talking about involving employees into mystery shopping management results and how they can improve directly. Another 2 cents to this conversation, Erik, did you see the news on CNN about the woman in the US that was sentenced to work 2 months on a fast food restaurant because she threw food on a fast food employee at Chipotle?
I think I saw a headline for that, but didn't look into it.
Yeah, so that goes a little bit about how hard it actually works on the food industry, and sometimes we downplay a little bit how difficult it is to hold this type of position. And the short story is a customer didn't like the service she received, and she threw the hot plate on an employee. Wow. And she was sentenced. The judge said that she could choose 2 months in jail or to work for 2 months in a fast food restaurant. And I want your views on this as well. Do you think that after the pandemic, people got too much impatient on service, and that is reflecting the way that employees are, I would say, refusing to work on this type of service at the moment? Does that play a role as well?
I haven't understood that question, Chris.
Do you think that is more difficult now to recruit people for this type of service, not only because of the conditions in terms of salary, but the challenge that is to work with people?
Absolutely. One of the biggest customer service bodies in the UK is the Institute of Customer Service, and they've started an initiative or a campaign really to support shop workers, frontline workers, because they're getting so much more abuse now than they were before the pandemic, certainly. And there's been a huge rise in terms of the percentage numbers of abuse that frontline workers are getting. And I think you're right. People are being more picky now in terms of where and how they want to work. And ultimately, it is difficult getting quality people in the right positions for companies, I believe, at the moment, although we are seeing the early signs of recovery.
Yeah, I believe that in terms of management, being supportive in terms of mental health is part of how we engage our employees to better perform and serve our customers. And of course, dealing with stressed customers is part of the job. And sometimes it can make a lot of difference to be more available and be nice and smile. And we can actually get a more loyal customer if we can make that difference and being able to deal with stress on a daily basis. And going back here to your return on investment studies that you were mentioning before, we have seen in Emil's presentation the different research methodologies, and some are more objective, some are more subjective. And I know that you have a lot of experience using mystery shopping for training purposes. in the hospitality sector. Do you want to share an example about this? For example, how mystery shopping can add value to a study like one that you just presented, or a customer satisfaction? I know you have already spoke about that, but if you want to share a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we possibly have covered it previously, but I would say that years ago we used to work in silos, so mystery shopping programs would basically just work on their own, so they weren't really attached to any other data collection method. And more now we're seeing data collection methodologies combined to create more compelling stories. Certainly from the point of view of the work I'm doing, mystery shopping can often be used as a vehicle for change. And by that, I mean that, say, a customer satisfaction survey proves what their customer priorities are, where the failures are perceived to be, and the difference that improvements would make. And a good mystery shopping program would be sort of using that information to create a good mystery shopping survey, really testing performance at a local level across any given estate, and highlighting the gaps really in terms of what customers want, what customers' needs are, and what's actually being delivered. I know, Chris, you and I often speak in the years we've known each other that mystery shopping is customer experience designed compared to customer experience delivered. So yes, obviously an objective methodology. But I think one of the things that are most exciting for me to look at it in my role, and one of my passions really, is looking at those gaps that exist between what the expectations are and what the delivery is, and trying to think of ways to reduce those gaps. Really, it's all about increasing revenue, and that's how I really sort of frame all of my discussions with the frontline in terms of what if you did this, what difference do you think it would make? So yeah, I think interesting times, and really important to use studies sort of together as opposed to in isolation.
Yeah, and sometimes companies don't understand how easy it is to measure return on investment for micro studies in mystery shopping. If a company already knows for impulse purchases on the cashier, if they know that for every 10 customers, if they offer an additional product, when they are paying, one of them will buy it, 1 out of 10 will buy it. If we send a significant sample of mystery shoppers, and we say that out of 10 shoppers, only 1 of them were offered the opportunity to buy an additional product, we can easily calculate the potential loss in revenue. So there are many ways we can measure return on investment with mystery shopping alone.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is a lot of companies are hesitant to try and make that connection. And I know a lot of our colleagues in MSPA struggle to actually find those return on investment examples, because either they're hesitant to ask their clients for some financials to support the data that they're providing, or they don't have the trusted relationship with their clients for the clients to feel confident actually offering to combine data streams so that these more compelling cases can be made. So I think it's important that people do try and make the connections, do try and look at return on investment, because of course it's
it's like in the restaurant industry, there are brands, for example, that knows the difference in sales, that asking, do you want a dessert, or bringing the menu with the page open and showing the options and asking, would you like to order a dessert? There is a difference in the percentages of yes. So if the mystery shopper says, I was just asked the option if I would like to ask a dessert instead of showing a menu, that's a way to measure return on investment, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Example.
There's a huge difference between the two actions.
Yeah, I mean,
so
simply
Jill,
at the end, would you like anything else? If I've been sitting in a pub for half an hour after the check came, I might want something else. I mean, there's a possibility for more sales there just by a simple question asked. That's a very key point.
Especially if you are sitting in a coffee shop, for example, instead of asking, do you would like something else, or would like a cake to go with the coffee?
Absolutely.
That's definitely yes. So, Jill, Now that we are starting the year, what would be your top recommendations for the hospitality industry for 2024?
Okay, great. So when I look at the priorities or the trends that have been identified for this year, as agreed upon by most of the research houses that I've read, there are three clear priorities that I think absolutely apply to this sector. And we've talked about them today already, but really just putting those in context, I would say, one, we need to remember that digital support is currently the weakest link in the customer journey. So we saw that in your research, and I see evidence in mine all the time, because the focus is currently placed too much towards acquisition and not enough on retention. So manning up that retention resource. And better focus absolutely needs to be placed on responding to customer feedback, especially that negative feedback, as you guys have highlighted in your study. And then secondly, customers don't give feedback like they used to. We've mentioned the fact now that only 66% of customers give direct feedback. So more needs to be done to understand the customer journey and how CX is being delivered. And finally, I'd say always think fast, friendly and knowledgeable service, obviously plus great ambience and quality food, because they are absolutely the key metrics that are going to increase customer return and recommend rates.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I say that we should never open a digital channel if we don't have capacity to respond to it. I'll give you an example. I did a reservation to a high-end restaurant here in Lisbon, and I received automatic confirmation from a do not reply account, which is already bad, without any alternative way of responding it, not a link, not a phone number, or anything else. And when it comes to communication channel, this should never happen at all. So great recommendations. Emil, would you like to add anything to Jill's recommendations for 2024?
It is difficult at this point to make better highlights on top of what Jill has shared. These are great insights and certainly does align with what we have identified in our industry study, but it is just a great confirmation to get on the objective measurement side of things. So as far as 2024 is concerned, answer the negative reviews.
Yeah,
that is my message.
Yeah, there's some low-hanging fruit, I think.
A lot of it.
I have a final recommendation for the hospitality and food and pubs in general. Please go back to plates. I don't want to be served in anything that's not a plate. I'm old. That's it. Back to you, Erik.
All right. Well, it's interesting, Jill, to hear confirmation from you about the need to have both the subjective measurements, like obviously the online reviews and customer ratings, but then the objective measurements, the objective methodologies with that too. And that really goes back to the concept of synergistic CX that we talk about a lot here on the CX channel, because you can't just have one component or the other and really improve customer experience, because it's not just about measuring it. You want to also improve it. And so you need to know what action areas to dive into. You need to know where the problems are, and you need to be able to, like you said, test the staff and test the product and test the quality of what's coming out the door for the customer, and making sure that that's actually what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. Well, that's kind of it for today's podcast. We'd like to share again that exciting news. We are launching a magazine as well. So we're going to have a CX channel magazine. It's called Synergistic CX. And it has a similar format to some of the video that you've seen here, some of the slides and such. It aligns with this particular podcast. So it will have everything that you saw today. It'll have the industry study, all the different graphs and the customer journey map and everything else like that. And also, we'll have this posted as well on our blog. You can visit our website, which is synergistic.cx. And of course, there's always cx-channel.com, cx-channel.com. So you can visit us there. You can visit us on YouTube. You can visit us all across the internet. And next podcast that we will have is going to focus on another industry study. And this is going to be an interesting one. It's going to be focusing on the beauty, health, and wellness sector. We've got two that we're considering, and we'd love to hear from you, the audience, what you guys think would be interesting. So please, if you're on YouTube here, post in the comments, go ahead and vote and say what you'd like to see. We're going to focus on either option 1, which is shoe stores, or option number 2, which is hair salons and barbershops. So those are kind of the 2 that we're looking at for next time, but we can dive into whichever one's more popular. So let us know in the comments what you'd like. And of course, hit subscribe. You'll always be able to stay abreast of the latest trends and movements in the CX space. And I'd like to say thank you, Jill, very much for attending today's podcast. We're very, very happy to have you. You've got some great insights, and you're the first industry expert that we've actually had on as part of the podcast, this being our first industry study and first podcast after our initial one. So thank you very, very much for being here. And I'd like to say thanks again to everybody. So see you next time on the podcast, the CX channel, where CX professionals converge. Hope you have a great rest of your day or evening.